Hey, so, World of Warcraft. Oh boy. There's been a lot that has happened in the past few years with WoW. We went from having Legion being praised as one of, if not the best expansion ever made for the game, and now, 2 expansions later, people are leaving in droves and toxicity and negativity are at all-time highs. I want to take a closer look at how exactly all this happened, and why it happened. Hi, my name is Zach, or Evo, whichever you prefer, and I've been playing World of Warcraft almost my entire life. In the early days, I played casually as a kid. I enjoyed leveling, I didn't know there were raids or anything like that awaiting me at endgame. Eventually, in WoD of all expansions, I got into raiding, and it was incredible, so I pushed into Mythic and continued raiding Mythic for a few years. I eventually started making videos talking about the game, and then I got into machinima and telling stories within the game. So yeah, WoW is really important to me, and to be blunt, I love it, and I think I always will. From Mythic raiding inspiring my love of game design, to making YouTube videos which taught me video production and editing, and to all the great friends I've made along the way, WoW has had a massive impact on my life. Midway through BFA, I stepped back from Mythic raiding, and I have slowly started playing the game less and less, to the point where I'm no longer subscribed to the game. Well, I'll probably have to resubscribe actually to get the footage for this video, but you get the point. I transitioned this channel to variety so I could make a 45-minute video about Sonic Adventure 2, because why not? Contrary to what you were probably thinking, this change had nothing to do with me hating the game or anything like that, but rather I just wanted to spend less time playing the game because I wanted to focus on personal projects and college. I still go back to the game and check out new content, but I don't want to dedicate 6 hours or more a week to raiding. I've gone from being a casual to a hardcore raider and back to a casual again. I'm giving you all this context because this video is probably going to be rather controversial. I'm going to make a fairly bold claim, and that claim is, Shadowlands is actually a very good expansion in a lot of ways. It has its faults, but all around, it is a good expansion, and World of Warcraft is still a good game and a solid MMO. The hate and negativity surrounding the game have very little to do with the game itself, but rather it has more to do with the circumstances surrounding the game, resentment growing in the player base, and people's perceptions of the game. I know. If you still disagree with me at the end of the video, please tell me all about it in the comments. But hear me out first. Okay, first off, let's address the elephant in the room, the allegations against Activision Blizzard. There's no two ways around this. Everything that's happening at Activision Blizzard right now is awful. It's great that all this is finally coming to light, but it certainly isn't pleasant. For those of you who don't know, Activision Blizzard has been accused of fostering and covering up sexual harassment, as well as having discriminatory hiring and paying practices. Most of the claims that have been made have been substantiated, and it seems as though most of everything that has come out against the company has been true. It's awful and disgusting. Unfortunately, this isn't just a Blizzard issue. Companies like Ubisoft and Riot Games have similar allegations. I would recommend you look into this further if you haven't already. There is a lot of horrible stuff, and it seemingly just keeps getting worse. This is not the focus of the video, but it would be irresponsible for me to not bring it up at the start. So, moving on to the video. I'm no stranger to criticizing Blizzard, and I think they have made their fair share of bad decisions when designing the game. Here's a montage. They just kept doing world quests on Argus, which was so disappointing. Like one of the most important lore places ever. It's just world quests. Class design is one of the most important aspects of World of Warcraft, and I feel as though BFA has missed the mark in terms of class design quite a bit. The big mistake they made with Torghast was tying player power to it. Torghast fundamentally fails at delivering different experiences each time you enter. What the fuck? What the fuck? Blizzard, what the fuck are you doing? Azerite armor still sucks. Soulbinds just don't really add anything, and I don't understand why a system like this made it to live. Whenever I make a video talking about WoW, or hell, anything for that matter, I think it's vitally important to address both the negatives and the positives of the subject. Nothing is purely good or purely bad. That's just not the way the world works. So let's start with talking about the bad of Shadowlands. I have my fair share of issues with this expansion, from Soulbinds to Covenants, but most of these issues I will be tying back into discussion later in the video, where I can bring them up in a more useful context. However, there is one aspect of this expansion that doesn't really fit anywhere else in the video, and it doesn't have many redeemable aspects. That's the story. It isn't very good. I enjoyed it initially, but as the story has continued to develop, I've had more and more issues with it, and it's no wonder why it is so disliked by the vast majority of the player base. Currently, we're still waiting on a book to figure out the motivations of a villain we defeated last raid tier that has been built up to for years. That's just bad storytelling. At the same time, we still have no idea what the deeper motivations of the jailer are, who is currently our big bad guy. The story has been told in an extremely clumsy manner that focuses on mystery boxes as opposed to character development. Shadowlands is also a major departure from the world we know and love. This has led many people to just not really caring about all the new characters and areas that have been introduced because they aren't even in the same plane of existence. And rather than developing characters for us to care about, the story is rushing ahead to Zereth Mortis in 9.2, which looks cool in its own right, but it doesn't give me much hope that the story will improve. While Taron Gregory and his team still work their magic with the cinematics, it isn't enough to save poor character writing and a disconnected story. There are absolutely a few good moments, such as the reunion of Thrall and Draga, but these moments are few and far between. Overall, the story this time around is very lackluster due to underdeveloped characters and a lack of meaningful stakes. This expansion has led many players to just wanting to go back to Azeroth. This isn't a point that ties into the main points of the video too much, but it is absolutely a factor that is contributing to the negativity surrounding the expansion.
Oh yeah, Torghast kinda sucks. Doesn't really come up anywhere in the video, but there you go. Perception is extremely powerful. Most of us like to think that we are very objective in what we like and what we don't like, but that isn't always true.
Perception can completely alter the way we view a piece of media, be that a game or a TV show, what have you. For me, a very recent example of this is the show Arcane. Don't worry, I'm not gonna spoil it. I don't really like League of Legends. I played it for like a week in middle school and I didn't really care for it. Since then, League has been associated with toxicity based on videos I've seen and experiences I've had. I do not like League, and at that point that is so ingrained into me that I am resistant to liking anything related to League. It was on that logic that I initially dismissed the show Arcane because, it's just about some League characters, I don't really care. However, one of my friends highly recommended it.
So I decided to watch the first episode and I didn't really like it. At first.
I was focused on justifying not caring about it. I had decided I didn't care, so I was trying to prove that to myself, instead of just enjoying the show. After taking a break and coming back with the right mindset, the show blew me away, and I am thrilled to say that it is one of the best seasons of TV I have ever seen. And I couldn't be happier to say that I could not have been more wrong about that show.
First off, if you haven't seen the show, please go watch it. Second off, the point is that the way I felt about League influenced the way I engaged with Arcane.
If I hadn't been aware of that and actively fought against it, I probably wouldn't have finished Arcane. This is something that is hardwired into human nature, and it's something that I, on a personal level, try to counteract because I don't want to miss out on a masterpiece like Arcane because of my subconscious bias. In this case, it was only a vague dislike for League. By that, I mean I don't hate League or anything. I'm not bitter or resentful towards it, and to be blunt, I just don't really care about it. I think you can guess where this is going. If me having a slight bias against League can impact my enjoyment of a show, just imagine how much of an impact 17 years of baggage can have.
Let me remind you of something that you might have forgotten. Shadowlands made a lot of changes that were and still are fantastic.
One example of this is the removal of RNG gearing. Ever since Mists of Pandaria introduced Thunder Forging, RNG has become an increasingly prevalent part of the WoW gearing process. It reached a fever point in patch 8.3 of BFA, where corruptions could randomly proc on pieces, and these corruptions played a massive role in how much damage your character could do. I still remember I had a friend that I played with in 8.3 who played the same class as me. He was taking the game way more seriously than I was at the time. I didn't have incredible gear going into the patch as I had just re-rolled the warrior, and I was only raiding on a heroic level. Yet, whenever we did dungeons or raid content, I would crush him on DPS. Why? Because I got lucky and I got infinite stars on one of my items, the best corruption in the game. It pissed him off because he had better stats, he cleared harder content, and don't tell him I said this, but he played the class better than I did. But because I got lucky doing an invasion, I was able to easily out DPS him. While it was funny and we joked about it a lot, it was incredibly stupid and never should have made it into the game. Shadowlands removed the RNG-riddled gimmicky gearing that was so prevalent in previous expansions, which is something people have been asking for years. Shards of Domination are a step backwards in this department, but they are minor annoyances to the average player compared to Titan forging and corruption. Shadowlands also made great strides in giving players more control over the gear they got by replacing the Mythic Plus cache with a Great Vault. No longer are you running Mythic Plus to roll the dice blindly, but instead you can do dungeons, raids, or PvP to get multiple choices of gear per category. Again, this is a great change that was highly praised at launch. While I would still prefer vendors, there's no denying this change made getting gear feel better, and it made obtaining best in slot gear a far more realistic goal. Speaking of making the game feel better, can we address that classes in Shadowlands feel way better to play than they did in BFA? How about the fact that professions no longer have random rank upgrades? Or the fact that artifact power is no longer associated with player power, meaning the constantly grinding world quest is no longer required? Or the high quality of dungeons and raids? Or how about the reintroduction of PvP vendors?
I could go on, but I think you get the idea.
This isn't to say that Shadowlands hasn't had its missteps, because it has, like domination shards and random conduit upgrades, but it has also made numerous changes that are direct responses to player feedback, such as PvP vendors, or the removal of RNG gearing gimmicks. Many of the changes implemented were great for the game, and were highly praised by pretty much everyone.
And all of that is without going into all the great quality of life changes that came with patch 9.1.5, which, yes, was made to counteract backlash, but those changes were still made.
When I hear Shadowlands discussed today, I scarcely hear someone who is willing to acknowledge the good that the expansion has done. Instead, the narrative being spun is that Shadowlands is a horrible expansion that sucks, and exemplifies all the mistakes that Blizzard has made with the game, and how they continue to ignore fan feedback despite the fact that many of the changes made directly contradict that narrative. As time has gone on, people have continued to talk about Shadowlands like this to the point where it seems to be the de facto opinion, despite the fact that it is deeply rooted in half-truths. Next, let's talk about Korthia, because this zone got tons of shit. Why, exactly? Let's address the main issues with the zone. Firstly, it put a bad taste in everyone's mouth by releasing with numerous spawning bugs, broken quests, despawning chests, and quest items. There really is no excuse for a patch launching with these major oversights in it, and it absolutely hurt the experience. However, after a week, almost all of these issues were resolved.
It absolutely shouldn't have launched like this, but that doesn't make the zone bad.
Secondly, the reputation was tied to unlocking sockets on gear. This decision was extremely stupid. This meant that high-end players had to spend loads of time in the zone to get as much rep as possible in order to get a competitive edge. Notice how I said high-end players? That's because this doesn't affect 99% of the player base. For most players, simply improving how they stat their gear and learning their rotation better will make far more of a difference than getting a socket. So, while this is an issue for 1% of the player base, and this decision shouldn't have been made, it is absolutely inconsequential to the vast majority of people.
Thirdly, the zone really isn't that great visually speaking.
It grew on me, but it doesn't have the same visual flair as Mechagon or Nashatar. In terms of gameplay though, Korthia is great. Overlapping objectives and a great reward economy mean that you will have a reason to engage with every aspect of the zone. When going out to do a simple quest, you may run off to grab a treasure, run across the map to a rare, find a hidden artifact, and kill another rare before you even get to your quest marker. This makes the zone extremely engaging. Is the zone the best open world zone in the game? No, but it is better than most WoW patches. How does it compare to the Apexis dailies of 6.0? Or the nothing of 6.1, or the Apexis dailies of 6.2, or the World Quest of 7.0, or 7.1, or 7.2, or 7.3, or 8.0, or 8.1, or the Invasions of 8.3. The point being, this is some of the best world content we've had in years. No, it doesn't reach the heights of Mechagon, but that is an extraordinarily high bar. The open world content at the launch of Shadowlands was lacking, and sadly that has become a normal thing for modern expansions, but Korthia is a great zone in its own right, and that is rarely, if ever, part of the discussion. The point of all this is that the conversation surrounding World of Warcraft has been so skewed that it has lost any and all perspective on the content it is criticizing. Perspective is so important, and in this case, people are coming into the game looking for things to hate and to criticize. When if you take a step back and honestly evaluate the expansion, both in isolation and in comparison to other expansions, it's good. Not perfect, not the best, but not bad, and certainly not the worst. Although I have to be honest, all of this is avoiding the biggest issues with Shadowlands. Or rather, I should say the most discussed issues with Shadowlands, because in reality, outside of a small group of people, these conversations are meaningless.
I am of course talking about Covenants and Soulbinds.
So to give some brief context, Covenants and Soulbinds have gotten constant criticism from the announcement of Shadowlands. Covenants would have you choose between 4 factions in the Shadowlands, and you would ally with one of them. This choice would grant you access to cosmetics, special minigames, different Covenant sanctums, and so on. The issue is that player power was tied to this choice in the form of Covenant abilities, and that, of course, led to backlash.
Now, I entirely agree with this backlash.
Player power just shouldn't be tied to a choice like this, and having all 4 Covenant abilities in a new talent row would have been far better. With that said, the backlash is extremely overblown. Based on the conversation surrounding the topic, you would think that every player in the game would be forced to pick a Covenant they don't like in order to clear any of the new content in Shadowlands. And nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, this is only an issue that almost exclusively affects the top 1% of the player base. If you aren't pushing extremely high keys or doing mythic raiding or getting extremely competitive in PvP, you can choose whatever Covenant you want. It really won't matter. You'll be able to clear all the content you want to do with no issues. When I was a Mythic Raider, I loved looking into logs, dissecting why I or one of my teammates was underperforming and figuring out how to fix it. Most of my friends know this about me, so whenever one of my friends is struggling to get their DPS up, I'll often look over their logs and help them figure out how they can improve. This is something that happened a fair few times in Shadowlands. As my friends approached me this expansion, I started to notice a common trend. They would come to me frustrated and annoyed with the horrible systems implemented in the game, and they would be upset that they couldn't just play what they wanted. They had to pick a specific Covenant to be competitive.
These people aren't WoW haters, not at all. In fact, they lean on being more positive towards the game, so maybe there's something to all this after all, you know? Or at least that's what I thought until I actually looked at their logs.
In every case, the Covenant ability had absolutely nothing to do with their lackluster DPS. It all came down to bad stat management, suboptimal rotations, wrong talents, and so on. In reality, Covenants don't actually matter for most players. Unless you're already playing at peak performance, there are a million other things you can do to improve that would have a far more substantial impact on your output than simply swapping around your Covenant. This issue is blown out of proportion to make it sound like it would ruin the game for everyone, and because people trusted the content creators saying that, they embraced it as an excuse for their own bad performance, and this misconception spread like wildfire. It's to the point now where, according to logs, I think Preach is the one that did the study on this, Covenant choices are largely homogenized on a class-by-class basis, meaning that people were choosing the Covenant the internet told them to choose, not the one they actually wanted to join, because they perceived it as being that important, when no, it's not. Again, unless you are doing high-end content, you will be fine in any Covenant. Let me stress again that this is the vast majority of the player base. The Covenant system is absolutely deserving of criticism, because it's not okay that this system was designed with blatant disregard for high-end players.
Also, the devs should realize what type of community they have, and how implementing a system like this will realistically play out. But to act like this affects the entire community and the entire player base, it's simply a lie.
This has trickled down throughout most of the player base, and has no doubt made thousands upon thousands of players resent the game for something that isn't even true. Criticizing the system is fine, but the way criticism was handled in this expansion is exceptionally disingenuous. I have my own issues with the system that I haven't heard many people talk about, one example of that being the possibility of a player not enjoying the playstyle and feel of a Covenant ability. Hell, I was talking about this before the expansion even launched. So in my mind, the whole argument of, you might have to choose a Covenant you don't like, doesn't hold water because it simply isn't true for 99% of the player base, and the other 1% is choosing to play the game that way. What concerns me more is, what if a player loves the look of Ravendreth, but they hate their class ability, and being forced to use it ruins their class for them? That's something I'm far more concerned about, as it is a legitimate concern for every player in the game. I am more than happy to criticize WoW and Blizzard, because most of their systems have fundamental flaws, and that's the thing that's more annoying than anything. We don't have to make shit up to criticize the game. It has plenty of issues. We don't need to fabricate and exaggerate flaws, because there are more than enough real ones. Soulbinds are extremely similar to Covenants in that their downsides are overblown. The main issue with Soulbinds was conduit energy. Basically, this feature made it so you couldn't swap your conduits at will, and you would have to wait for a cooldown timer in order to swap again. This was done to prevent people from going back to their Covenant Sanctum in order to swap out conduits in between each fight in a raid or something like that. Again, this is not a good system, and it shouldn't have been put in the game. Yet again, with that said, this doesn't affect the vast majority of the player base.
Given the chance, how many players would actually swap conduits in between every fight? Not that many. There are some people who enjoy that level of min-maxing, myself included, but to the average player, it's just way too much hassle for barely any throughput increase. This is an issue, yes, but it is far from the major one it was made out to be. It has been popular to hate WoW for a while now. It gets clicks on YouTube and people love to get riled up about nothing. This negative narrative surrounding WoW has only been growing, and there are tons of reasons for that which we will go into. But at this point, hopefully I have at the very least established that the conversation surrounding Shadowlands and WoW in general is heavily skewed towards negativity, completely omitting positives and exaggerating negatives. This public discourse does not even come close to accurately representing the content of the game itself. And hopefully you realize I'm not a shill for Blizzard. I will happily criticize the game and talk about its issues. I only ask that we criticize the game truthfully, without making stuff up, ignoring positives, and exaggerating issues. So at the start of the video, I mentioned going into how this all happened and how the narrative and discussion surrounding the game got so skewed. I figure it's about time we do that. This is of course a very complex topic and I can't touch on everything, but I'll hit on what I see as the biggest contributors. There has been growing resentment against WoW for many years. For people who don't play the game, that resentment is fairly straightforward. WoW took over the spotlight and dominated the MMO space for 17 years, while also causing stagnation within the MMO genre because developers were no longer looking to create unique MMOs, but rather just trying to copy WoW and get some of its success. And MMOs that did their own thing quite often would fail horribly. WoW is such a dominating force that it's no surprise non-WoW players grew to resent it. Only now, with WoW fallen from grace, is the spotlight finally getting shown on games like Final Fantasy XIV. I'm glad that other games are finally getting a shot, as I've been playing other MMOs for years, and many of them are great. It's pretty easy to see where the dislike for WoW comes from, given that so many great games have been overshadowed by its dominance. That's far from the only type of resentment that was building, though. Resentment for the game also started coming from within the community. This mainly started picking up speed in Cataclysm and has steadily been increasing since then, only taking a brief pause in Legion. There is a lot of reasons for this that we are going to go into, but I want to briefly address the type of game that WoW is. What I mean by that is that WoW is an MMORPG, and it's a game that has a tendency to get people addicted and cause them to spend way too much time playing the game. Speaking from experience, when you are fully into the game, it's not just a game. It is a major aspect of your life. I still remember looking at raid logs of my high school history class. Playing WoW was the first thing I would do when I woke up and the last thing I would do before I went to sleep. I have no regrets about playing the game as much as I did because I loved every minute of it, but it is a game that has the capacity to consume your life if you aren't careful. I feel it's important to bring this up because a lot of people who play this game have a huge amount of who they are as a person tied up in the game, some to an unhealthy degree, which means many WoW players tend to have extremely strong emotions about the game because to a large portion of people who play it, WoW is so much more than just a game. One of the biggest reasons for resentment in the community has to do with Blizzard's track record. Each new expansion has had its own major controversy that has gotten loads of attention since Cataclysm. In Cata, many casual players found heroic dungeons at launch way too hard, and that was a major source of drama. Generally, the expansion is considered far weaker than Wrath of the Lich King, and the final patch, 4.3 Hour of Twilight, had a raid that was strongly disliked. The story resolution was considered lackluster, and the patch outstayed its welcome, lasting almost a year until the launch of Mists of Pandaria. Mists had its own issues. It had an overabundance of required daily quests, and a theme that many players hated. It's retroactively considered one of the best expansions, but that certainly wasn't the opinion at launch. I don't think I need to tell you about Warlords of Draenor. It didn't have anywhere near enough content, and it was full of broken promises and cut content. This was when people really started turning on Blizzard because they lied to us about major aspects of the expansion, such as movable garrisons, capital cities that got cut, and of course Faerlon and the Shattrath raid. WoD broke people's trust, but Legion momentarily won it back. Despite having issues, Blizz was able to use the extra dev time from cutting WoD short to put loads of content in Legion. There were vocal critics about artifact power, titan forging, and legendaries, but for the most part, the reception was very positive. Unfortunately, Blizz wouldn't keep that up with BFA. Battle for Azeroth had loads of issues. Islands and Warfronts, the two new features, failed spectacularly, and Azerite armor and Azerite power formed what was considered to be the most unrewarding gearing loop in the history of the game. And that brings us to Shadowlands.
The track record for this game has been all over the place, and in recent years it's been leaning into inventing systems for each new patch or expansion that will be thrown away in the next patch or expansion. This approach of making disposable systems is despised by many, and the mistakes of each expansion start to form a cycle. Step 1. Create an unrealistic system that is overly ambitious that will fail to live up to expectations at launch. Step 2. Ignore player feedback pointing out the flaws in the system. Step 3. Wait until the final patch of the expansion, and then fix the issues that players have had with the system since beta. Step 4. Throw the system away and start all over again. And all that's without going into the issues with class design. Point is, each expansion has had numerous problems, and this has led a large section of the community to feeling like the devs never learned their lesson and just keep repeating the same mistakes.
And for the record, I'm in that group.
The continued stumbles of the game have obviously led people to resenting not just the game, but the devs behind it. While it's absolutely ridiculous to claim the devs don't care about the game and are actively sabotaging it, that is a commonly held belief in the community.
Thinking about that logically for even like half a second is more than enough to realize just how absurd that whole idea is. But that's the level of resentment we're talking about here. What hasn't helped things is the way that the devs communicate with their fanbase.
Developer communication has been a point of contention in the WoW community for a very, very long time.
To summarize, they aren't very good at communicating.
Devs very rarely explain to players why they do the things they do, and that's led to conspiracy theories running rampant. There was a period of time in Legion when they had regular Q&As, and they were great until they stopped answering tough questions, and eventually stopped doing the Q&As altogether. If you want some examples of bad communication, all you need to do is look at the announcement of 9.2 and the interviews that followed it. 9.2 looks great to me. We don't know too much about the systems, but I can't wait to explore the new zone at the very least.
But, the way they announced this.
We've addressed that people aren't fond of the Shadowlands story. Well, one of the reasons for that is how they've tried to retroactively shove the Jailer into Warcraft 3. The Jailer in Shadowlands were not in any way planned during the development of Warcraft 3, and that is painfully clear based on the lack of foreshadowing. However, the Jailer being behind everything in Warcraft 3 is a major part of the Shadowlands story, a part that the vast majority of the community has rejected and ridiculed. Now, in 9.2, they are pushing forward with this narrative, which is expected, but did Steve Denuser really need to say it like this?
The Shadowlands story pulls together threads that started in Warcraft 3 and wove their way through many of our expansions. Eternity's End serves as the final chapter of one book of the Warcraft saga.
In this clip, he's trying to say that this is what Warcraft 3 and 17 years of WoW storytelling has been building up to, and no, just no. I get the idea, but saying it like this is absolutely tone-deaf, condescending, and frankly insulting to some of the brilliant stories that have been told leading up to this point. This change undermines the Arthas storyline, and that is something people hold very dear to their hearts. By simply phrasing this differently, this all could have been avoided. Instead, say something like, "This is a story the team's been wanting to tell for years." Get the same general idea across, but without pissing off the entire community. In an interview with GamesBeat following this video, the game director Ian Hazzikostas said this.
It's a long example, but it's an important one.
But a lot of what goes into 9.1.5 isn't a one-off. It's a reflection of us changing a lot of underlying philosophies that have motivated our approach to designing WoW. A lot of these things, like I mentioned regarding conduit energy, are outgrowths of lessons that were taught to us by our predecessors, by the founders and leaders of the team, about the importance of meaningful choice, the importance of preserving character identity, that may have led us to not being friendly to alt gameplay and people's ability to get caught up on their alts. The reality is, the way people play the game has evolved. What was the right answer for the WoW player base in the game 15 years ago may not be today. There's some stubbornness, but clinging to these old lessons, some things are hard to let go of when your training and your education as a designer and a developer on a team led you to having them instilled in you. I have no doubt there are elements of truth in this statement. However, to a community that is jaded and bitter, this comes across as if Ian is trying to pass the buck and avoid any and all responsibility by putting the blame on lessons instilled by the old guard. It's a bad look, even if it is true. Both of these are examples of key developers saying things that are obviously going to blow up in their face. Again, this only reinforces the idea that the devs are out of touch or are sabotaging the game, leading to more resentment and more bitterness.
And this isn't something new to Shadowlands, this is a long-standing issue. For whatever reason, the developers can't or won't explain why they do things the way they do, and when they talk to the community, they often come across as tone-deaf and oblivious to the grievances of their players. Poor communication and an inconsistent track record bred tons of resentment. But that's not everything. Not even close. On top of all of that, the rate at which patches are released has slowed down dramatically in BFA and Shadowlands. Legion had an insanely fast patch cadence because it had that extra dev time from WoD, but BFA and Shadowlands haven't had that advantage. And Shadowlands has had to deal with both the pandemic and company restructuring. This has led to content droughts, each being longer than the last. I briefly mentioned that Legion had its fair share of issues, which, if they were in BFA or Shadowlands, would have been criticized like crazy. Artifact power wasn't a great system, it incentivized grinding daily to keep up with the power curve, the open world content was lacking severely and consisted only of world quests, legendaries dropping at random led to player power being largely determined by RNG. Speaking of RNG, Legion introduced Titan Forging 2. Legion had a lot of issues, but it is considered one of the best expansions ever. And there's a very obvious reason for that: the patch cadence. For most of the expansion, we could count on a new patch every 77 days like clockwork. This meant that new content was always right around the corner, and no one had time to get super annoyed at all the faults of the expansion. The fast patch cadence of Legion covered up most of the expansion's flaws, and helped make it great. In contrast, there was a 9-month gap between 9.0 and 9.1, a far cry from the 77 days of Legion. This gave players ample time to grow to hate every single aspect of Shadowlands. You all know that generic saying that if you spend too much time with someone, the little things they do that aren't really that bad will drive you insane? Yeah, that applies to video games too. The positives of the expansion suddenly seem less important when the player base has spent 9 months fixated on the flaws of the game. As I've said before, the content of Shadowlands is really good, and it's the context that has caused the community to turn on it. Imagine for a second that there were only 77 days between patch 9.0 and 9.1, and then imagine there were only 77 days between 9.1 and the quality of life changes in 9.1.5. Suddenly, Shadowlands is one of the best expansions ever made. I mean, yeah, it has its issues, but there's just so much to do. Except that's not reality. If Legion was stretched out to the extent Shadowlands is currently being stretched out, I guarantee you people would have hated it. And if Shadowlands was as fast as Legion, people would probably love it. This context is so important, as it is a major factor to why the resentment in the community keeps growing and why it has gotten this bad. Well, I couldn't talk about resentment towards Blizzard without talking about the cash shop, could I? Yeah, the cash shop is awful. It's better than almost every other MMO cash shop out there, but it still sucks. Unique and cool mounts are put on the cash shop while the game is still sitting in a 9-month content drought. Let's play a little game. Which one of these mounts is a cash shop mount and which one is an in-game mount? If you guessed Mount A was a cash shop mount, then you got it. What about these two? If you guessed Mount B was a cash shop mount, then you're right again. Most people probably got those correct. Why? Because there is a clear step up in quality with a cash shop mount. Which one of these is the new tier set, and which one of these is the new cash shop item? Okay, I'm sorry. That's just mean. WoW is a subscription-based MMO that expects you to pay full price for new expansions, and on top of that, it insists on having overpriced cash shop items. As time has gone on, we have seen them continue to get increasingly greedy. We have had significantly more store items added in BFA and Shadowlands than any other expansions previously. On top of that, the shop is expanding to include transmog and toys. My heart sank when they sold the Sprite Darter's Wings, because I knew it was just the first step to selling full-fledged transmog on the store, ripping cool armor sets that could have been in-game, out of the game, to sell them for real money. And now, here we are, and that's exactly what's happened. They didn't add a transmog section to the store to only sell one item. Quick disclaimer, most of the cash shop items I'm showing in this video were either gifted to me or I obtained them through the WoW token. There's a reason I'm down to only 1 million gold. Oh, yeah, WoW token. I guess we should talk about that. The WoW token is a way for players to buy in-game gold for real-life money. An advantage of this is that if you are rich in-game, you will be able to play for free and buy cash shop items with gold. But let's talk about everything else. From a business perspective, this is great for Blizzard. Buying a WoW token costs more money than a simple sub, so even if someone does manage to play for free, Blizzard is actually making even more money because someone had to buy that WoW token. This system works out great for them, but it has some serious consequences. Basically, Gold carries can be bought with real money, introducing a semi-pay-to-win element into the game. You could theoretically log in, buy enough gold with real money for a mythic raid carry, and get loads of loot along the way. Meanwhile, a player who doesn't spend money will have to get good enough to get into Mythic or farm that gold legitimately. I say semi-pay-to-win because the core of the game still feels intact, at least to me, but this is walking a very fine line. The WoW token has legitimized gold selling. Now, there's always that voice in the back of your head that if you want something off the auction house, that you could just spend some real-life money and get it. Like I said, this isn't too invasive at the moment, but all it will take is one wrong move to become heavily pay-to-win. Shadowlands legendaries came dangerously close to that, with the base items costing loads of gold at launch, in which case you either needed to farm gold or grind professions to get it. Or, swipe that credit card. Naturally, when a community is already bitter and resentful against the game, an increasingly invasive cash shop isn't exactly helping things. But I still haven't talked about the biggest thing causing resentment towards Blizzard at the moment. Let's talk about the allegations again. I'm not going to go in detail about the allegations because, again, it's not the focus of this video, but we do need to talk about their impact. To say that people felt betrayed when all this came out would be an understatement. There isn't too much to say on this as it is extremely self-explanatory. People broadly trusted Blizzard and the people who worked there. Many of us grew up playing Blizzard games, not just World of Warcraft, so the added context of what was happening there, it suddenly makes WoW not seem so fun. While some people have been saddened by this, others have been outraged by it. Again, it is fairly obvious to say that this has caused hostility and resentment towards WoW and Blizzard to grow. I will say, I think it's extremely important to remember that not everyone on the dev team was involved in the allegations. In fact, most of them weren't. Most of the people there just want to make a good game, which is a detail that is lost in a lot of the discussions surrounding this. Blizzard shouldn't be forgiven, and serious change is needed. But don't take it out on the wrong people. This is an issue not just with Blizzard, but with the gaming industry at large, and numerous other industries for that matter. If you want to boycott Blizzard, more power to you. But the solution isn't as simple as burning Blizzard to the ground, even if it is easier to think that way. Due to all the factors I've been talking about, the deck was well and truly stacked against Shadowlands. Notice how most of these issues have very little to do with Shadowlands? Yeah, that's kind of the point. The external and historical influences are playing a massive role in the way that Shadowlands is being perceived and critiqued. If we care about making WoW better, we need to be able to separate these issues from our objective critiques of the actual content of the game. Okay, moving on to the final big section of the video. Let's talk about the negativity and the toxicity in and around the game. As I've touched on multiple times throughout this video, the conversation surrounding the game is skewed heavily towards negativity, and we need to talk about another one of the major factors: content creators. I'm not saying that the negativity surrounding the game is because of WoW content creators, but there are certain creators, and you know who I'm talking about, who are more interested in fanning the flames for views than seeing the game get better. SoulBreezy and Taliesin and Evitel are examples of content creators that actually address both the positive and negative aspects of the game, where many others just focus in on the negative. Now, most content creators who focus on the negative aren't bad actors, they're just people who are disappointed and annoyed with a game that they care a lot about. With that being said, there really is no understating how influencers being negative, well, how influential that is to the community and to the community perception. There are certain creators where if they say something, their audiences will immediately adopt that viewpoint and spread it everywhere without giving it much thought. When this happens with a negative sentiment, it spreads like crazy. And there are so many misconceptions in the community that are born of this. One example that we've talked about in this video being how impactful covenants really are. Okay, I've beat around the bush enough. I need to use someone as an example to make my point. So, let's talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Asmongold. Before I go any further, let me make one thing clear. I have nothing against Asmongold. I talked to him briefly. I think Zach is a really nice guy who genuinely wants to see this game improve. When he uploads to his Zach Raw channel, he is far more relaxed and natural when presenting his viewpoints, and oftentimes, I definitely enjoy his videos. The reason I'm choosing to talk about Asmongold is A, people know who he is, B, I have personal experience with the impact he can have, and C, I don't think he means any harm. And I think of all the people I could talk about, if he saw this, he would react the best to what I'm going to say. At the very least, I think he would get where I'm coming from.
So let's start out with that personal experience I mentioned. A couple years ago, before the launch of BFA, I made a video criticizing the class design in BFA. In fairness, this isn't my best video, largely because I hadn't learned that the internet will always, without fail, take your argument in bad faith. I wish I had explained some of the points better, but overall, I stand by most of my opinions.
Anyway, this video kind of blew up, and eventually, Asmongold watched it, and this was his initial reaction.
Guys, Evo here. So this is a video that I didn't really want to make, but it's something that I think is really important.
Yeah, you did, dude. What do you mean? Of course you did. Just you know that everybody thinks the same thing, and you know people are gonna click on it. They're gonna agree with you. You can get money. Yeah, right. You didn't. Give me a fucking. I hate when people say that.
At the time, I hadn't monetized the channel, and I was only doing YouTube to learn video editing, so, yeah.
As the video continued, Asmongold warmed up to me, and slowly, towards the end, started agreeing with most of the points I was making in the video. But he started out extremely hostile and took my arguments in bad faith.
But he came around though, right? So, you know, what's the big deal? So, this is the scary thing about the influence that someone like Asmongold has. Because no, it didn't matter.
That initial reaction was enough to get me death threats for weeks. People telling me to kill myself, you know, all the classics. At the time of making that video, I was 19. I had very little direction in life, and I used YouTube as my outlet. A close family member had just passed away, and I was living with a roommate who I had known for years, who would eventually end up saying that we were never actually friends, calling me a worthless loser, and all sorts of other fun stuff. And, oh yeah, he actively tried to sabotage my friendships by lying about me behind my back. So, suffice it to say, this wasn't the best period of my life. So when all this happened, it hit me really hard to have someone who I like had watched for years react that way to me, and then to have his fan base come after me like that. I already wasn't in a good spot, and this didn't exactly help. I hit it and acted normal in my reaction video to him, but it did impact me.
I'm not saying any of this for pity points. I mean, hell, I put myself out there on the internet. I was kind of asking for it.
The reason I'm telling this story is because it demonstrates just how little it takes for someone like Asmon to start a hate mob. He wasn't trying to do that. In fact, he chastised chat for making fun of me once he realized what was happening. But it was too late. This story, as well as countless others, just goes to show the power and influence some content creators have over their audience. A lot of viewers don't think critically about what a content creator says, and instead just take it at face value and repeat it across the internet. So if a content creator like Asmongold talks negatively about the game, it impacts the community perception massively. Same thing if they talk positively. The combination of this with the increased focus on negativity around WoW has created a feedback loop of constant negativity. Again, let me stress two things. One, I'm not saying that Asmongold is responsible for the state of WoW, simply that influencers, in general, have a massive impact on the way the game is perceived. And in the case of Shadowlands, most content creators have been extremely negative. And two, I bear no ill will towards Asmongold.
What happened wasn't great, but I have thicker skin because of it, and Asmongold wasn't trying to cause any of this.
Alright, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the real reason I chose to talk about Asmongold.
It has to do with a certain emote. Yeah, it's the whole /spit thing.
As a recap for anyone who doesn't know, Asmongold started, I guess I'll call it a campaign, where he encouraged his audience to /spit on anyone they saw using cash shop items in-game. This was done to combat the increasingly invasive cash shop. Basically, he wanted everyone to stop buying store mounts so that Blizzard would stop putting them in the game. Again, I don't think Asmongold meant any harm by this. I think he genuinely thought this might make a difference, because as far as I understand it, Asmon never meant for this to become harassment. It was only meant to be a sign of disapproval.
So there's a few issues here.
First off, even if this went exactly according to plan, and millions of WoW players stopped buying store mounts, it wouldn't matter. Even if each new store mount didn't sell like crazy, they wouldn't go away, because of course they wouldn't. It doesn't cost Blizzard much of anything to have the team make a cool new mount and throw it up on the store. It certainly costs less than actually making content to go with the mount. It's shitty, and it sucks, but cash shop items aren't going anywhere, even if you can get most of the players to stop engaging with the cash shop entirely. Unfortunately, that's just the way this works.
So the other flaw with this is that, yeah, of course this was going to turn into harassment.
I want to give Asmongold the benefit of the doubt here, but there is no way that he conceived this idea and didn't immediately realize that his audience would take it too far.
Again, I don't think he meant any harm by this, but I don't know what he was thinking.
Anyway, this took off and people were doing it everywhere. I remember I was on the new 6-month sub mount at some point during 8.2, and I got /spit on, and the guy messaged me saying all sorts of vulgar shit, accusing me of ruining the game, you know, all that fun stuff, and then I messaged him back and said, well, you know, I actually got this mount through the 6-month sub, so if you think about it, I'm actually giving Blizzard the least amount of money possible to play the game.
That got him to shut up.
While I can joke around about this and laugh it off, many other people didn't have that experience, and some of the harassment got pretty bad. One of my friends stopped riding the mount her husband bought her, despite the fact she loved that thing, because people kept spitting on her and harassing her. You know the hate campaign you started has gotten out of control when the developers resort to removing the emote from the game. Yeah, all around, this situation was just awful, and I have no doubt it's still happening to this day. But the issue isn't just that this was an extremely harmful use of power, but also, rather than getting mad at Blizzard, this redirected the hate towards people who just wanted to play the game, and this bred so much toxicity and hate within the community. I will repeat yet again, I do not think Zach is a bad guy by any stretch, and I do not think he truly meant harm by any of this.
It's not an excuse, but it is extremely important context.
Please do not go harass him or anything like that. I do not condone any negativity being thrown his way.
And Asmongold, if you happen to watch this, know that I bear no ill will towards you at all, man.
So what's the point of all this? Well, the reason I felt it necessary to bring up Asmongold is because no one illustrates how one perspective can influence the perception of the game at large better than him.
Okay, I am no longer talking about Asmongold.
The impact of influence is a large reason so many misconceptions have been spread about this game. It's a major reason that so many people seemingly forgot the positives of this expansion. When almost every content creator under the sun is being negative, it isn't exactly shocking that the community follows suit. Before I move on from talking about content creators, let me emphasize that I'm not saying content creators are solely responsible for the state of the game.
Idealistically, I shouldn't have to point this out given everything else we've talked about in this video, but if there's one thing Asmongold taught me, it's that the internet will always take your arguments in bad faith. Alright, I don't know how people are going to take that last section, how people are going to react, so, let's move on to something that we can all agree upon, we can all sort of come together, reunite, and then go forward from there. So, okay, I got it. Let's talk about the negativity and toxicity coming from the Final Fantasy community. I'm digging my own grave.
Okay, so Final Fantasy, by all accounts, is a wonderful game with a fantastic community, and I am not here to dispute that. While I have not gotten into Final Fantasy XIV myself, I have no doubt it's great. And if there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's that Yoshi P is freaking awesome. So if I think Final Fantasy is a really good game with a great community, what am I talking about? While I am thrilled that new MMOs are finally getting the spotlight, part of the community surrounding Final Fantasy XIV is extremely toxic and obnoxious. I'm mainly talking about a sect of ex-WoW players that can't talk about Final Fantasy without shit-talking WoW within the same breath. It is also used in a very pretentious way with the attitude of,
"You're still playing WoW? That is such a shitty game. Haven't you heard of the critically acclaimed MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV? It is better than WoW in every conceivable way." It gets annoying.
I am well aware this is not the entire community, but it is a part of the community, and it is a very vocal part. This toxicity simply leads to the discourse surrounding WoW and FF devolving even more. I have a fair bit of experience with this side of the community, but Skoll Shorties has even more. He is very active on Twitter, and therefore has to engage with this side of the community far more than I have to. So I'll pass the mic over to him and let him share his experiences.
Greetings and salutations, Evo folks. I'm Skoll Shorties, and I've been playing World of Warcraft for a long time too, since Reign of Chaos with Warcraft 3 and Wrath of the Lich King with, World of Warcraft. So both the high and the lows of the game, really. Recently, I've been playing other games outside of the Blizzard ones, and have even been tempted to play the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy XIV, as many of my friends have been asking me to play it. However, the spark to play it hasn't really reached me, and one of the largest reasons for that has sadly been because of the player base. Now, the vast majority of the Final Fantasy community, to both my knowledge and my experiences, are actually pretty friendly and great. but there is a group of them that are made of mostly the ex-WoW players, who cannot praise Final Fantasy without ripping apart World of Warcraft at any chance they get. This makes me lose almost immediate interest in trying to join said game, because it's a community tearing at a game I already love, and one that I am still playing. And I get that it's not everyone, but it is a problem that I and many are still facing. It is a rather frustrating development, and I hope that one day I can actually give Final Fantasy a shot. But in the meantime, I'll let Evo finish his many thoughts till then. See ya! Am I even allowed to do that this early? Oh well. Double see ya!
Thanks, Skoll. Go check him out on YouTube and Twitter. Links are in the description down below. So, there is one more thing I need to talk about with regards to Final Fantasy, and that's the double standard at play.
WoW is a game that people have been playing and resenting for 17 years now. So people, broadly speaking, are more familiar with the game, and therefore are more able and more willing to pick it apart. When it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, that doesn't really apply. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are willing to pick it apart, but that doesn't represent the community at large. The FF community, including the WoW refugees, aren't hell-bent on exaggerating its flaws to make it seem like a horrible game. Point in case, the Praetorium. This is a massive story instance that is in the General Roulette queue, aka Dungeon Finder. It is significantly longer than all other dungeons in Final Fantasy XIV, it has numerous skips that new players will likely get lost on, and very long unskippable cinematics. In the FF community, this is generally accepted as something that is annoying, but isn't anywhere near game-breaking. Which, you know what, that's very reasonable, I agree. Now, imagine this exact same thing in WoW. You could randomly get a mythic keystone for the Praetorium. You would not hear the end of it. People would bitch and moan and complain and exaggerate the issue until Blizzard removed it. There is a fundamental difference with how people approach critiquing these games, and it is not even close. That's without even mentioning that most WoW refugees can't properly judge the game, as they are still in the honeymoon phase, where they have tons of new content to do that's been built up over time. This double standard, combined with some of the toxic members of the Final Fantasy XIV community, are annoying, sure, but the bigger issue is that it leads to the narrative around these two games being even more skewed.
Again, by all accounts, FF14 is a great game with a great community. But this section of the community is very real, and it is extremely toxic. Okay, we're almost done.
We've talked about a lot. This is probably the longest video I've ever made, and that's because this isn't a simple topic in any way, shape, or form. WoW and the discourse around it has degraded to the extent where flaws are greatly exaggerated, positives are completely omitted, and negativity, blind negativity, has entirely enveloped the conversation. Misconceptions and lies have been spread and now dominate perspectives on the game. This has been a long time coming and is the culmination of years of growing resentment.
There are reasons we have gotten to this point, and both developers and players are at fault.
My goal with this video isn't to convince you to resub to WoW or anything like that. If you're happier playing Final Fantasy or any other game, stick with it. Do what makes you happy. My goal with this video is to offer a different perspective, and hopefully convince you that this situation is far more complicated than the prevailing narrative would have you believe. World of Warcraft is still an extremely good game, from its core gameplay to the extremely well-designed group content. This is a game that has a remarkably strong foundation.
I'm looking forward to 9.2. Not because I think it'll be a perfect patch, but because I think it'll be fun. At least for a while.
Criticism is an essential part of games like World of Warcraft remaining relevant, but it is all too easy to get caught up in that criticism and become fixated on the negatives. Shadowlands is the perfect example of an average to good expansion that has been disregarded because of factors that have very little to do with the quality of its content. I don't want criticism of the game to stop, but if we want this game to improve, the community at large needs to take a step back and reevaluate what we are criticizing and how we are criticizing it.
This game has plenty of flaws. We don't need to make stuff up.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed that, or at the very least found it interesting. I have no idea how this video will be received, if people will love it or hate it. I have no idea if anyone will even watch it, but yeah, I just felt like it was something I had to make. I'm very curious to hear what you all think. Did I bring up some interesting points, or did I just piss you off? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, links to Twitter and Discord are in the description. Like and subscribe if you feel so compelled. If you've resonated with the message of this video and you think this is something like the WoW community needs to hear at large, then share this around. I'm a smaller YouTuber. This won't get around unless people share it. And I don't think that this video on its own can make these massive changes, right? But I think if enough people see this and enough people have the right takeaways from it, and they start sharing it, and not the video, but the ideas, I hope that this video can do some measure of good for the community, because I just want to see this community get better. That's all I fucking want. I love WoW. I love this community, and I want it to improve. But yeah, so that's my gist. Anyway, I will see you all later. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.